Lynchings were acts of racial terrorism during the Jim Crow era. More than 4,000 African Americans were lynched in 20 states between 1877 and 1950. 592 people were lynched in Georgia, which ranks second only to the state of Mississippi. Fulton County had the most known lynchings in Georgia with 35. DeKalb County has 3.
The resolution for the module is not as critical as getting all the stuff done for the marker.
Yeah.
The main thing we want is that the marker will honor the known, list the names of the people we know, and the unknown victims of lynching. Okay? That's the main concern. Was I correct?
The names and dates of DeKalb's lynchings were made public as part of a new memorial in Montgomery, dedicated to highlighting the impact of lynchings of African Americans. DeKalb leaders are planning a series of events dedicated to acknowledging the county's lynchings and atoning for that dark period of its history. Now, the NAACP and other community partners are raising money to finance its installation and other events collectively known as the Remembrance Project. DeKalb is believed to be just the second government entity in Georgia to acknowledge the lynchings that occurred within its borders. In addition to helping the county reckon with its past, markers highlighting the lynchings that occurred in DeKalb could also provide healing for the loved ones of those affected by these killings. But first, that history must be examined. After a black man was accused of assaulting a white woman, a mob in Redan, a rural community 16 miles east of Atlanta, wrestled him from the custody of deputies and hanged him from a tree. Years later, quarry workers chased 2 black men into the Lithonia woods, but the details of their deaths and their names were lost to history. In another case, a black jitney cab driver stopped to pick up a fare, not knowing that ride would end with the Ku Klux Klan leaving him to die in Druid Hills. These 3 accounts are the known lynchings in DeKalb County, hidden in history and receiving little attention for many decades.
This is what I had seen when I had come before, is the fact that there's something already here that would allow us to have the module sit here. That's the idea. However, just need to make sure that it's okay, because even if we have to lift it, we would lift it with some cement or something like that. If it want to be, I don't know if we want to do it this way, or do we want to slant it up like you're saying so you can see. But remember, DeKalb County is on the bottom of that, and then the names of the victims are actually on the side. So,
are we talking ideals here?
Yes.
Okay, just ideals. That's a perfect spot for the module. You want to put it someplace near a bench or someplace where people can stop, read it, and reflect.
Yeah.
Stop and read it.
Can I have a part? I want to be the lead.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Are you sure you want to be a lead in this production?
Yeah, well, he's the director. No, she's the director.
Yeah.
What you guys are doing, man?
And we're NAACP.
Right. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'm the president, and she is 3 chairs.
Oh, yeah?
Executive
That's
committee.
serious.
Yeah.
She has all the brains. She knows all this stuff, right?
I don't know about that, but seriously,
Yeah.
put on your bucket list a trip to Montgomery to view the lynching museum. What is the proper name of that? Peace and Justice for Peace and Justice. It's the only museum in the nation, it just opened last April, that memorializes the victims of lynching in the country. Okay. Georgia had the second most, next right behind Mississippi. In Georgia, Fulton County had the most. Now we're not talking about people who were tried and found guilty.
Right.
We're not talking about them. These are just people who were lynched by mob violence.
So we never found those who
They
did
never.
the crime.
Well, they know who did the crime.
They know who did the crime.
Yeah. You know who did the crime.
But in terms of, yes, we know the complexion of the
Now we talking about those little guys in hoods and
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but
a
we
lot
never
of
knew
them.
I mean, we don't know the persons. We know the group, but we don't those persons.
But you have to remember that the law enforcement was a part of the group,
That was the police department.
and the sheriff's office.
The sheriff's office led that.
You need to go to Montgomery and get the whole story.
Which gets us to where we are today.
Right.
Why it's so hard to change the agency.
Right.
Because there's some history that folks don't want to really realize.
to the pattern.
Yes.
Kids need to
Yeah,
know
right. This is a systemic issue that goes way back to lynching.
DeKalb County and some of its cities have joined a national movement to confront America's history of racism in a more honest and complete manner. The conversation began when 2015's deadly church shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, prompted new attention to monuments that promote ideals of white supremacy. In DeKalb, discussions about racial injustice increased after a woman was killed during a protest over Confederate monuments in Charlottesville, Virginia. In Decatur, DeKalb's county seat, a 30-foot-tall monument towers over the town square. It is dedicated to Confederate soldiers of a covenant-keeping race.
It is important for DeKalb and DeKalb's government to publicly acknowledge the terrorism that occurred in our nation, particularly after the Civil War and through the early part of the 20th century.
County and city leaders have tried to move the monument from such a visible location, but state law limits their options.
Lynchings, many of them were state-sponsored or at least supported when they occurred. And so it is important for us, the current leadership of this county, and really the citizens of DeKalb County and the state of Georgia, to recognize the history of lynchings, to create contact for lost cause monuments like the one that's behind me today, as well as the marker or the monument that is Stone Mountain. All of this is a part of our history. It is a low point in our history, but it is history. We should study it. We should learn from it. You can't hide it. You can't ignore it. It's a part of how we became to be. And let us hope that we learn from the mistakes of the past to create a more equitable present and future.
These acts of racial terror were covered in antiseptic details in local newspapers, including the Atlanta Constitution, a predecessor to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The articles are devoid of empathy for the victims, let alone any analysis of the white supremacy and terrorism that was often at the core of these acts. Here is an excerpt of an article about the lynching of Reuben Hudson, printed in the Atlanta Constitution on July 28, 1887. "Kill him, hang him," cried a dozen. "Shoot him," chimed in a half-hundred. "Burn him," yelled the entire crowd, now almost frantic. The mob began pushing up to the guards, and the guards, powerless to resist the pressure, gave back first against one wall, the mad humanity, and then against another. The Negro stood with head bowed, never uttering a word. He heard the abuse heaped upon him and listened to the threats without moving a muscle. This did not please the crowd. The men wanted to see him suffer, and some, more heartless than others, kicked and thumped him. The Negro paid no more attention to the licks than the words. He appeared to think that Bailiff Norton would protect him as far as possible and clung to his side as closely as he could. The crowd pushed nearer the prisoner until those on the outside of the throng could not see him. Cries to put him to death continued, but for a few seconds no demonstrations of an intention to carry out the threats were made. There was no one willing to make the break. Finally, a tall, stalwart young farmer elbowed his way through the throng to the prisoner, and laying his hand on him said, "Your time has come." One of the region's most iconic stone structures is the Big Bethel AME Church on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta. That building, with its recognizable Jesus Saves sign on its steeple, is the oldest black church in Atlanta. It was inside this historic sanctuary that Porter Turner was laid to rest in 1945. At the time, his death was an unsolved murder.
All I knew is that he had been killed. And the family story was, well, by me being the youngest, I didn't know that much about it anyway. But I recall being told that I had an uncle who had been killed by a white man. Back in the day when I was a baby and before I was born, they didn't have regular taxis for black people. And so there was certain men, and my dad and my Uncle Porter were two of them who drove what they called jitneys. So they were unlicensed, but everybody knew that they would take you for a fee. And Dad never picked up anybody white. He only picked up other black people, or back in the day they were Negroes, back when we were Negroes. And it's my understanding that Uncle Porter would pick up white folk. And I was told this from other family members, of course. Being the youngest, I did not know. And I was just shocked when you told me that he was the last person killed officially in DeKalb County by the Klan.
Most of Turner's family had no idea he was lynched until recently, let alone that his name is among the 4,000 included in the lynching memorial in Montgomery.
In this almost 80 years now since this has happened, almost 80 years, and now he gets some recognition. My father would have loved this. I'm just sorry that my aunts and uncles did not live to see that there is some kind of recognition for what happened to my uncle.
Lithonia, the city of Granite, is the location of the third recorded lynching in DeKalb and the one we know the least about. We know that some young girls were picking wildflowers when they reported that at least 2 black men had dragged one child into the nearby swamp. We know that white quarry workers ran into the swamp after the black men. We know that the white quarry workers, after a day-long manhunt, returned alone. The assumption isn't that the accused men escaped into the woods. It's that they were killed. Some history books say as many as 5 black men were lynched that day. They will be memorialized on markers in DeKalb as unknown, much like the unknown grave sites at an old cemetery in the heart of Lithonia's historically black Bruce Street neighborhood.
The cemetery stretches on for about a half a mile. It goes back to the days when people just, this is where I live, and I just go walk outside the city limits and just plunk people into the ground. So it wasn't an official place at one point. But so you have the oldest part where there's unknown, and we don't know the years and the time. And that's where we think these lynching people, the people that were lynched in Lithonia, may well be.
You know, I must say that I was just shocked to see the condition of the cemetery, and you know, I just felt compelled to constantly just bring light and shine light to this space and place. So I've done tours down here. I've brought my children, other people's children, and it's just one of those things where I feel like you have to know about it. You have to recognize it. You can't ignore it so we can once again heal. You know, we haven't healed, and I always say that if we neglect our ancestors, they're going to continue to neglect us.
The DeKalb County Commission approved a resolution authorizing a lynching marker and its placement on the grounds of the county courthouse in Decatur.
Somebody suggested the courthouse. And I thought, oh, that's perfect, because these people were denied justice. They were denied due process. They were just pulled out and strung up or stabbed, shot, killed, whatever. So by putting them close to the house of justice after death is the best way we can honor them.
It is one of the busiest places in the county and a symbol that there is no hiding from the past.